best friend. Annabelle started to shift uncomfortably in the front seat of the luxury sports car. She was seated in the middle, between Tony and Beethoven. Beethoven's cold, metallic skin brushed against her arm, sending a strange and unsettling shiver through her. But her ever-cheerful husband, Tony, didn't notice anything amiss. Annabelle discreetly pushed away the robot dog's tail. The dog, with a plush rabbit toy in its mouth, turned to look at her before moving closer to the window. Tony then said, "There it is, the hotel we're staying at tonight." When they arrived at the hotel, Tony ordered dinner, but Annabelle, tired from the journey, had no appetite. When the food arrived, Annabelle sat beside Tony, while the robot dog jumped onto the chair next to him. Tony commanded Beethoven to greet, and the dog obediently followed the command. Tony rewarded it by tossing the favorite rabbit toy. Annabelle, however, tried to issue her own command, "Get down," but Beethoven ignored her completely. Annabelle frowned and said to Tony, "I told you to leave this tin can at home." Tony replied, "This is the latest model of robot dog. I wouldn't leave it behind. It's loyal, programmed with the latest AI. Maybe it didn't follow your command due to some processing issue, but don't worry, its primary directive is not to harm humans." Annabelle rolled up her book and raised her hand towards Beethoven. Seeing this, Tony quickly ordered the dog to get down and greet Annabelle. The robot dog immediately complied with Tony's command and then swiftly returned to his side. Annabelle looked at the robot dog with disdain, questioning in her mind why she felt like a stranger in her own home ever since the dog arrived. She realized that Tony had asked her to quit her job because he had been promoted to a management position at the pet robot company. He wanted her to stay home and rest, but she felt lonely. To keep her company, Tony had brought Beethoven, a new model still in the testing phase, with advanced decision-making and emotional systems that made it more lifelike than previous versions. Tony brought it home, saying, "While I'm away, it will protect you and keep you company." Dogs are man's best friend, after all. But as time went on, Annabelle swore she sometimes saw a strange glint in Beethoven's blue eyes, almost as if it were smirking. "It's just a tin can," she told herself, refusing to accept it since the day it entered her home. Tony trained it alone, teaching it to greet, fetch, and maintain its cleanliness whenever he had free time. "It seems you're spending all our time on this robot dog, Tony," she said, growing increasingly frustrated. What angered Annabelle more was Tony's complete disregard for her statement. As a result, whenever Tony went to work, Annabelle would open the door, throw out the rabbit toy, and chase Beethoven out of the house. She grew more irritated each day at the sight of the robot dog. One day, she woke up to find that Beethoven had chewed her favorite shoes into tiny pieces. She screamed and attacked it in a frenzy. "Stupid robot, lousy dog, worthless junk, get out of my house." After that, she could only think of ways to get rid of the robot dog. "Tony, when you go to work, maybe you should take Beethoven with you. You could monitor its processing system while you're at it." Tony understood her true intent. She didn't want the robot dog around anymore. So, he took Beethoven with him, letting it sit beside him in the car. Annabelle noticed the robot dog's arrogant demeanor, its blue eyes shining as if declaring itself the true owner of the car. "Time for dinner, darling," Tony's voice interrupted her thoughts of the past. After finishing their meal in the luxurious hotel dining room, Annabelle and Tony went for a walk by the hotel pool. The cool breeze carried soft music, creating a beautiful and romantic atmosphere. "Tony, how about we sit by the pool for a while?" Annabelle said softly, leaning her head on Tony's shoulder. "But I need to check on Beethoven's system first," Tony replied. Annabelle smiled faintly and said, "I'll wait for you here, my love." She waited by the pool, but her face flushed with anger when her sharp eyes caught sight of Tony walking towards her with Beethoven in tow. The robot dog sat down between them. "Tony, if you cared for me half as much as you care for that dog, that would be nice," she said, finishing her sentence just as Beethoven got up and trotted to the pool's edge. It looked back at Tony with a pleading expression, prompting him to grab the rabbit toy and playfully run after the dog, much to the amusement of the onlookers. A little girl remarked to her mother, "Look, Mom, that dog can laugh." Annabelle felt a sense of relief, knowing she wasn't the only one who saw the robot smile. As Annabelle watched people swimming in the pool, she wished she could join them, but she couldn't. She was afraid of water and couldn't swim. She wondered if the robot dog could swim and how long a robot could stay underwater. When the pool closed for the night, Annabelle and Tony walked back to their room, with Beethoven, of course, leading the way alongside Tony, while she trailed behind. Annabelle tried to rid herself of the anger, hatred, jealousy, and self-pity that filled her heart, but she couldn't. That night, Annabelle lay awake, consumed by feelings of bitterness and defeat. Months passed, and she trained herself to set an internal alarm clock, waking up at any time she desired. Early the next morning, Annabelle awoke at 5 a.m. and quietly led Beethoven outside, through the dewy grass, toward the pool. When they reached the pool, the robot dog immediately sat down. Annabelle whispered, "Come here, follow me," but the dog didn't move. Annabelle yanked the leash hard, dragging Beethoven to the edge of the pool. She heard Tony's voice booming, "Annabelle. Beethoven. What are you doing here? It's dangerous." She replied, "I woke up and couldn't find Beethoven, so I came out to look for him and found him by the pool. I rushed over to pull him out." "Stupid dog," Tony muttered. "Good thing the collar's safety system alerted me. Otherwise, something might have happened to it." Tony took the leash from Annabelle's hand and led the dog back home. Annabelle had to endure the feeling of being a loser for a while longer. She tried to live with the dog for several more months, repeating the phrase, next time, every night before bed. When vacation season arrived, Tony took her and Beethoven to a lakeside house for a holiday. Annabelle gazed at the shimmering lake, surrounded by trees whose leaves had begun to change color. She saw a boat docked at the pier in front of their house. Turning to her husband, she sweetly said, "Shall we go for a boat ride, darling?" Tony smiled and replied, "Oh darling, have you gotten over your fear of water?" "I'm so happy." "No, I'm still afraid, but with you, I'm not afraid of anything." They looked into each other's eyes and embraced tightly. But Tony then said, "I'll take Beethoven for a walk first." He reached for the rabbit toy, and the clever dog immediately stood up as Tony finished speaking. Annabelle looked at it with cold and hateful eyes. 2 hours later, when her anger had somewhat subsided, her husband returned with a smile. He quickly hugged her and excitedly shared what he had found in the forest. "Beethoven led me into the woods, winding through an old road. We found an old house made of ancient stone, and most interestingly, there was an old well beneath the house. I nearly fell in, but Beethoven saved me." He continued, "The house's floor was rotted, and when I stepped on it, it broke through, revealing the well beneath. It seemed very deep, I know, because I threw a stone down and waited for the sound of it hitting the bottom." Annabelle listened attentively, her eyes sparkling. "Can you take me there now? I want to see it." Tony took his wife to the old house, and they stood in front of it. He wrapped his arm around her shoulder and proudly said, "Beethoven found it. But I won't take you inside. It's dark and dangerous. I covered the well with an old board I found in the house. Dogs truly are man's best friend, aren't they, darling?" "Yes, it's very clever," Annabelle replied, looking at Beethoven with empty eyes and a slight smile at the corner of her mouth. That night, after Tony had fallen asleep, Annabelle grabbed the leash and put the collar on Beethoven, taking the rabbit toy, its favorite, with her. She led Beethoven through the winding path back to the old house. She brought it to the old board Tony had used to cover the well. Annabelle looked at Beethoven and threw the rabbit toy onto the board. "Go on, dog. Fetch it." Beethoven looked at the toy and slowly walked onto the creaky old board. The sound of the wood cracking softly echoed. Annabelle smiled with a strange gleam in her eyes. Beethoven picked up the toy in its mouth, sat down, and looked back at her, its blue eyes meeting hers. Annabelle suddenly realized the collar, it had to come off. If Beethoven had the collar on, Tony could find him. She needed to remove it first. She called out to the dog, Beethoven, come here. Come here, you stupid dog. Beethoven perked its ears and lay down on the board. Annabelle, growing anxious, began to crawl onto the old, rotting board herself. She inched closer, the wood creaking beneath her. Just as she was about to reach the dog's neck, Beethoven suddenly jumped off the board as if it weighed nothing. The board crashed down, and Annabelle plummeted into the darkness of the well. She tried to scream in terror as she fell, feeling as if she was plunging endlessly into darkness until she finally hit the cold, filthy water below. Annabelle struggled to rise to the surface, water and dirt filling her mouth, bringing her back to her senses. She looked up and the only thing she saw from the deep, dark well was Beethoven peering down at her, grinning wickedly in satisfaction.